The air at Fort Redington Air Base carried a low hum, the kind that came from 1,000 engines, drills and radios all speaking at once. It was the sound of discipline, of endless schedules, and commands echoing across the open tarmac. New recruits came and went every week, each one eager to make an impression. But when Lieutenant Emma Hayes arrived, hardly anyone noticed. She stepped off the transport jeep in a crisp uniform duffel bag over her shoulder, her face calm and unreadable. There was nothing particularly loud about her presence, no booming voice, no confident swagger like the others. She walked quietly, eyes scanning her surroundings, every detail absorbed with quiet precision. Even the driver who dropped her off gave her a curious look before speeding away. She didn't wave goodbye. She just turned toward the base headquarters and walked. Inside, the hallway buzzed with officers calling out orders, pilots comparing flight logs, and laughter spilling from the mess hall nearby. Emma moved through it like she didn't belong to the noise. Her nameplate gleamed on her chest, but no one said her name out loud. When she reached the administrative desk, the officer barely looked up. "New transfer?" he asked without emotion. "Yes, sir." Lieutenant Emma Hayes, reporting for duty. Her voice was soft but steady, the kind of tone that didn't demand attention, but still carried a quiet confidence. The officer checked his clipboard, nodded, and pointed toward the end of the hall. Barracks 3. Orientation at 0700. Welcome to Redington. She nodded once and left. That was her arrival. No cheers, no introductions, just the sound of her boots echoing down a long, sterile hallway. That night, as others joked and unpacked, Emma sat alone at the corner bunk, her belongings neatly arranged with military precision. A single photo rested on her nightstand, a squadron of 6 pilots standing beside a jet, all smiling except her. The corners of the photo were creased, as if handled too many times. She looked at it briefly, then slid it back into her duffel. The laughter around her faded into the background. She lay down without a word. By morning, Fort Redington was alive with drills. Emma moved in sync with the rest of her unit, following orders with quiet efficiency. Her every motion was controlled, almost mechanical, as if her body was trained to obey without hesitation. The other lieutenants noticed her silence, but didn't bother asking why. In a world full of voices competing to be heard, the quiet ones often disappeared. Still, one man did notice, Lieutenant Mark Reynolds. A loud, confident pilot known for his charm and easy smile, Reynolds thrived on competition. He watched Emma from across the hangar as she methodically inspected her assigned aircraft. She checked every bolt, every wing angle, every panel, not rushing, not talking, just working. When she finally caught him staring, he gave her a playful salute. "You're making the rest of us look lazy," he said, grinning. Emma gave a small nod. "Just doing my job, sir." "No need for sir," he chuckled. "We're the same rank." "You're Hayes, right? Where'd you transfer from?" "Langley," she replied simply. He waited for more, but none came. After a few seconds, he gave up and moved on. Still, something about her composure lingered in his mind. She didn't have the arrogance of most pilots, nor the nervous energy of newcomers. There was a stillness in her, the kind born not of inexperience, but of someone who'd already seen too much. By the second week, the nickname started. Someone in the mess hall had whispered it after she walked by, "Ghost." It spread fast. She hardly spoke, never joined conversations, never laughed. She showed up early to every drill and was always the last to leave. She was present, yet somehow unseen. "She's like a shadow," one of the sergeants joked. "Yeah," another added, "a ghost with clearance." The name stuck, but Emma didn't seem to care. She went about her duties as if none of it mattered. There was something deliberate in her silence. She wasn't avoiding people. She was avoiding noise, the kind that filled the gaps where pain used to live. When others chatted over dinner about weekend passes and upcoming missions, Emma stared quietly at her food, her mind far away. Every so often, her gaze would drift toward the runway lights flickering in the distance. She watched jets take off into the night sky, vanishing into darkness. Her fingers would tense slightly, as if remembering the feel of a control stick under pressure. No one on base knew that she had once flown one of those missions, a classified one that had gone horribly wrong. It had been 18 months earlier, somewhere overseas. Emma had led a small squadron through hostile airspace for a rescue extraction. The mission was supposed to be quick, in and out in under an hour. But a storm rolled in, and comms failed. Radar interference jammed their signals, and in the chaos of wind and lightning, one wrong call sealed their fate. She had hesitated, just long enough for enemy fire to find them. When her aircraft returned, she was alone. The debriefing that followed was clinical. Reports were filed, protocols reviewed. The military didn't blame her. Weather, interference, unavoidable circumstances. But Emma didn't need their forgiveness. She had already sentenced herself. Since that day, she spoke less. She smiled never. And every time she stepped into a cockpit, she carried 6 ghosts with her. At Fort Reddington, that past followed her like a shadow no one else could see. The others saw a quiet woman trying to fit in. She saw a penance she could never complete. One evening, while reviewing flight manuals in the hangar, Reynolds approached her again. "You know, people are starting to wonder if you're a robot," he teased lightly. Emma didn't look up. "Maybe I am," she said flatly. He smiled. "I'm serious. You're good, too good. But you don't talk, don't joke, don't. Breathe." Finally, she looked at him, her eyes steady and unreadable. "Talking doesn't make you better at your job, Lieutenant." Reynolds blinked. "Fair, but it might make you human." That earned a faint smile, the first anyone had seen. "Humans make mistakes," she said quietly. "Robots don't." Reynolds didn't know what to say after that. He watched as she walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of jet fuel and mystery. Over the next few days, she continued to stand apart, but whispers turned to curiosity. Even the commander began to take notice of her punctual reports and flawless technical records. She never missed a briefing. Her performance in simulation drills was near perfect. When others complained about schedules or equipment, she just listened, adjusted, and executed. There was something magnetic about the way she handled herself. No arrogance, no fear. Just precision. By the end of her first month, Emma Hayes had become an enigma wrapped in silence. Some thought she was cold. Others thought she was hiding something. Both were true, but not in the way they imagined. And though she had no intention of standing out, fate had already begun to line her path. The quiet woman everyone ignored was about to shake the entire base without ever raising her voice. Because sometimes silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes silence is the warning before the storm. By the second month at Fort Reddington, Lieutenant Emma Hayes had become something of a mystery everyone wanted to solve. She didn't talk much, hardly at all. She showed up before sunrise, ran drills alone, and left after dark. Her bunkmates swore. She barely slept. The only sound they ever heard from her room was the soft turning of pages or the metallic click of a dismantled firearm being reassembled. And when she walked through the base, she moved with such quiet precision that people joked she could sneak up on a jet engine. That's how the nickname Ghost was born. It started as a joke at first. One afternoon, in the crowded mess hall, a mechanic from the hangar had spotted her glide silently past the lunch line and whispered, "There goes the base Ghost." A few others laughed, repeating it loud enough for her to hear. She didn't even flinch. The silence that followed was awkward. Everyone waited for some reaction. But Emma just collected her tray, sat down at an empty table, and began to eat, eyes fixed on her food. That unbothered calm made the joke die in the air. Still, the name stuck, and like everything on a military base, it spread fast. Soon, even the radio operators were calling her Ghost during morning drills. Some said it teasingly, others respectfully. But beneath every version of the name lay the same fascination. How could someone so quiet, so detached, still manage to outperform half the base? Lieutenant Mark Reynolds, however, wasn't laughing. He had spent weeks watching her from afar, not out of pity or suspicion, but genuine curiosity. He'd flown with enough pilots to recognize the difference between fear and focus. Emma wasn't scared. She was locked in, like a machine that didn't waste a single move. One night, after a long day of maintenance checks, Reynolds found her sitting on a bench behind Hangar 12, staring out toward the runway. The floodlights washed her face in white light, and for a second, he thought she looked almost ghostly, not because she was pale, but because she seemed to exist somewhere between presence and absence. Couldn't sleep either? He asked, sitting down beside her. Emma didn't look at him. You shouldn't be here after hours, she said softly. Neither should you. That earned him a faint smirk. People talk about you, you know, he continued. Half the base thinks you're CIA. The other half thinks you're a myth. I'm neither, she replied simply. So which is it? You just hate talking, or you hate people? She was quiet for a long time, watching the blinking lights of a cargo plane taking off in the distance. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of something unspoken. Talking makes people think they know you. They don't. Reynolds frowned slightly. Maybe they'd stop making up stories if you let them know the real you. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he almost regretted his words. Her eyes weren't cold. They were heavy, like she was holding the memories of someone who'd already seen the worst and survived it. There's nothing real left to tell, she said quietly. And just like that, the conversation ended. She stood up and walked away, leaving him alone with the echo of her words. Over the next week, the whispers about Ghost intensified. In the mess hall, soldiers debated her story like a campfire legend. I heard she used to fly Black Ops missions. Nah. She's probably just some prodigy who skipped normal training. My buddy at Langley said she once flew through a storm and didn't flinch. Each story grew wilder than the last, but Emma ignored them all. Yet, beneath the gossip, something had changed. Her flawless performance in drills was no longer seen as strange. It was impressive. The respect was unspoken, but real. Even Commander Brooks, a man notorious for cutting down overconfident rookies, had begun to take quiet note of her reports. Her stats were unmatched. 0 flight errors. 0 missed communications. Every task executed with surgical precision. He didn't know her story, but he knew talent when he saw it. Still, what made Emma Hayes truly different wasn't her skill. It was the weight behind it. Every night, she returned to her room, where she kept that same creased photo hidden in her duffel bag. Sometimes, when the base lights dimmed and the noise died down, she'd pull it out, 6 smiling pilots beside a jet, all frozen in time. Her thumb brushed over each face. They were more than teammates. They were family. Then her eyes always stopped on the last face, Captain Jason Ward, her former commander, and the man who trusted her with his squad. He had been the one she couldn't save. The mission had gone wrong so fast. Radar jamming, missiles in the dark, screams over comes. Emma had made the call to pull up instead of breaking right. A single decision, one she replayed in her mind every night. She could still hear Jason's final transmission. "You did good, Lieutenant. Don't stop flying." Those words haunted her as much as they saved her. Now, at Fort Reddington, she flew like she owed the dead an apology. But the base didn't understand ghosts. It understood noise, bravado, and dominance. Quiet pilots didn't earn respect. They earned suspicion. One afternoon during refueling practice, Emma overheard a pair of sergeants talking near the runway. "She's got skill. I'll give her that," one said. "But I don't trust anyone that quiet." "Maybe she cracked," the other replied. "Heard she's seen combat. They don't send you back stateside unless something's broken." Emma pretended not to hear, but their words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She wasn't broken. She was surviving. Later that day, Reynolds found her in the simulator room, sitting alone, watching a flight playback on the big screen. "They're idiots," he said simply, sitting down beside her. She didn't respond. "They talk because they don't know what silence sounds like," he added. This time she glanced at him, her lips curling into the smallest trace of a smile. "And what does silence sound like, Lieutenant?" He leaned back in his chair. "You." That earned a quiet laugh, soft and fleeting, but real. For the first time, Reynolds saw something human break through her shield. Over the following days, the dynamic between them shifted. Reynolds began to see Emma not as a mystery to solve, but as a soldier built from discipline and loss. They started flying together during training sessions, their teamwork seamless despite the lack of words. She spoke only through actions, hand signals, quick nods, sharp instincts. He learned to read her rhythm, her pauses, her focus. The other pilots noticed too. Reynolds and Ghost, they joked. The loudmouth and the shadow. But when they flew, it wasn't funny. It was flawless. And while others laughed, Commander Brooks watched silently from the observation deck, a hint of curiosity in his expression. He'd seen many types of soldiers come through Fort Reddington, loud ones, cocky ones, even heroes who burned out fast. But Emma Hayes was something else. The kind of soldier who didn't need to prove anything. The kind who only made sense in the middle of chaos. One stormy evening, as rain battered the base, the commander stood by the window of his office, staring at the flight logs. Emma's name appeared again and again, each entry spotless. He tapped his pen thoughtfully. "She's quiet," he muttered, "but not empty." Outside, Emma was walking back to her quarters, rain soaking her uniform. She didn't hurry. The water streaked down her face like tears she no longer allowed herself to shed. She had learned long ago that silence was the only way to keep the past from screaming. And yet, deep down, she knew that silence could only last so long. Because at Fort Reddington, sooner or later, everyone's limits were tested. And when that day came, the ghost on base would finally make them all listen. The morning began like any other. Brisk wind sweeping across the airfield, distant roars of engines, boots striking pavement in perfect rhythm. Yet there was a strange buzz around Fort Reddington that day. Word had spread. The base commander himself was observing the tactical flight simulator evaluations, a grueling test meant to push even seasoned pilots to their limits. Crashes were common, and passing scores were rare. It was the kind of challenge that built reputations or destroyed them. Inside the simulator bay, 20 officers gathered in line, each preparing for their turn in the cockpit pod, a steel capsule lined with glowing panels and control screens that mimicked the inside of a fighter jet. Emma Hayes stood near the back of the room, her expression unreadable as always. She hadn't volunteered. Her name had been selected by the flight instructor, almost on a whim. Most assumed she'd do fine, but nothing remarkable. After all, Ghost was known for precision, not daring. Reynolds, standing beside her, leaned close and whispered, "You ready to make the rest of us look bad?" "I don't compete," she replied softly. He smirked. That's what people say before they win. When her name was called, the chatter dimmed. Emma stepped forward, calm and deliberate, and climbed into the simulator pod. The technician sealed the hatch, and the overhead lights dimmed to a deep blue. On the control screen, the mission parameters flashed. Scenario: Arctic storm rescue, hostile interference expected. A collective groan rippled through the room. It was the hardest simulation available, near impossible to complete. Commander Brooks crossed his arms at the back of the room. "Let's see what she's got," he muttered. Inside the pod, Emma adjusted her headset and checked her instruments. Her heart rate barely changed. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1. Go. The simulation exploded into life. Wind, snow, and radar alarms filling her ears. Visibility was 0. The cockpit shuddering as turbulence struck. The objective was to locate a stranded squad and extract them before a simulated fuel failure. It was chaos, even for experts. Emma's fingers danced across the console, adjusting altitude, rerouting power, recalibrating navigation systems by instinct. Her breathing remained steady, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Altitude. Dropping too fast, the instructor warned over the intercom. "I know," Emma replied calmly. Her voice was soft, but unwavering. With surgical precision, she stabilized the craft, banking right into a tight spin maneuver that made 2 officers watching flinch. Her hands were steady. Too steady. Outside the pod, murmurs grew louder. "She's gonna stall." One of the lieutenants whispered, "No one's ever completed this one. Look at her reaction time. It's insane." Even Commander Brooks leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. On screen, the simulation showed her aircraft descending through blinding snow. Alarms blared. Systems failed one by one. Most pilots would panic, but Emma barely moved. Her voice came through the speakers, low and clear. Switching to manual override. Adjusting pitch 10 degrees down. Deploying flares. A blinding flash on the simulation screen. She tricked the virtual radar into losing her signature. A bold move, one no one had tried before. "She's rewriting the mission on the fly," Reynolds muttered, half in disbelief, half in awe. Minutes passed like seconds. Every obstacle the simulator threw at her, missile locks, communication drops, system shutdowns, she countered with impossible precision. It wasn't luck. It was memory, experience, and something deeper, muscle memory honed through real trauma. Inside the pod, Emma wasn't at Fort Reddington anymore. She was back in that storm from her past, the one that took her team. Her hands moved faster, trying to correct the mistakes she'd made long ago, rewriting that history in this digital world. "Stay with me?" she whispered under her breath, not realizing the mic was still live. No one in the control room spoke. Finally, after 12 excruciating minutes, the simulation timer hit 0. The screen flickered to black. Then, in bright green text, "Mission successful, survivors extracted." For a moment, no one moved. The silence was almost physical. Then the technician turned around, wide-eyed. She actually beat it." "What?" the instructor stammered. "That's no one's ever done that." Commander Brooks's jaw tightened. "Open the pod." The hatch hissed open, steam curling out as Emma stepped down from the platform. Her face was calm, her posture relaxed, as if she'd just completed a routine drill. Reynolds was the first to speak. "What the hell was that?" Emma glanced at him. "A simulation," she said simply, then walked past him. But everyone knew it was more than that. The room erupted into whispers and stunned laughter. "She beat it? How is that possible? I didn't think the Arctic scenario could be won." Even the instructor looked shaken. He'd run that simulation hundreds of times, seen top pilots crash, burn, fail, but never this. When the commander approached him, his tone was low. "Rerun her flight data. I want to see her inputs." "Yes, sir?" They reviewed the footage in silence, frame by frame, watching her maneuvers, her impossible timing, her precision under extreme conditions. There were no mistakes, no panic, no hesitation. After a long pause, Brooks muttered, "That's not training. That's experience." Back in the hangar, Emma wiped her hands with a towel and began checking her flight notes, acting as if nothing remarkable had happened. Reynolds caught up to her, still shaking his head. "You realize they're never going to shut up about this, right?" "I didn't do it for them," she said. "Then why?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the simulator building behind him. "Because last time, I didn't get to finish the mission." Reynolds stared at her, realizing this wasn't about reputation or rank. It was about redemption. He didn't press further. Some ghosts didn't need to be named. That evening, the mess hall was unusually quiet when she entered. Conversations hushed. All eyes turned toward her. For once, there was no mocking nickname, no laughter. A few pilots actually stood when she passed by, not out of protocol, but respect. "Ghost," one of them murmured, half grinning. "You're a damn legend now." Emma said nothing, just nodded slightly and sat down with her tray. The whispers continued, but this time they carried admiration instead of curiosity. Across the room, Commander Brooks watched from his corner table. He'd seen dozens of promising pilots rise and fall, cocky ones who crumbled under pressure, loud ones who mistook noise for strength. But Hayes was different. Quiet, controlled, deadly effective. He made a note in her file that night. Exceptional composure under extreme pressure. Unconventional execution. Potential leadership material. Later, alone in her barracks, Emma sat. On her bunk, the room lit only by the faint glow of the runway lights outside. She stared at her hands, steady, unshaking, and thought of the faces in that old photograph again. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she'd failed them. She whispered softly into the dark, "That one was for you." Outside, a jet thundered into the sky, cutting through the night like her voice finally breaking through silence. The next morning, everyone on base knew her name. No one called her Ghost to mock her anymore. Now, the nickname was spoken with something close to reverence. And although Emma still moved through the corridors quietly, eyes down, there was something new in the air around her, an invisible gravity that made even the loudest pilots stop talking when she passed. For the first time, the woman they once ignored had made the entire base listen. Not by shouting, not by demanding, but by doing what no one else could. The simulator victory had spread like wildfire through Fort Reddington. By the next week, Emma Hayes' name was spoken in every hangar, every corridor, every late-night conversation. The once quiet officer had become something of a legend, the woman who beat the unbeatable mission. But Emma didn't bask in it. She avoided the attention, keeping her focus sharp and her schedule packed. Her days were spent in training sessions, and her nights, as always, were silent. Still, no amount of discipline could drown out the whispers that had started chasing her shadow. Because when someone rises that fast, people start digging. And what they found didn't match the story they knew. It was Staff Sergeant Carter who first brought it up over coffee in the mess hall. "You know, her personnel file's weirdly redacted," he said, leaning across the table toward Reynolds. "Redacted how?" "Whole pages blacked out. Service record before she came here is just missing." Reynolds frowned. "That's not normal." Carter shook his head. "Not even for special ops transfers. Something's off." Reynolds leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing toward the window where Emma crossed the tarmac, clipboard in hand, inspecting an engine. Her posture was precise, her focus absolute. She doesn't strike me as someone hiding something, he said. Carter chuckled. Everyone's hiding something, Lieutenant. The quiet ones just hide it better. That afternoon, the base was hit with an unplanned drill. A mock alert meant to test reaction speed. Sirens wailed, and soldiers scrambled into position. Emma moved instantly, taking charge of her section without hesitation. Commander Brooks watched her from the command tower, arms crossed. Her coordination was flawless. Crisp commands, quick decisions, no wasted motion. But as he observed, a strange feeling settled in his chest. He'd seen her kind of precision before, not from trainees or standard air officers, but from field operatives. People who'd been through real missions, ones that didn't make it onto official reports. When the drill ended, he called her into his office. "Sit down, Hayes." She did. Back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. Brooks studied her in silence for a moment, the hum of the air conditioner filling the space between them. "You've impressed a lot of people this week," he began. "I'm just doing my job, sir." "That's part of the reason you impressed them." He leaned forward. "But I reviewed your records, or tried to. There's a gap of 18 months before your transfer here. Care to explain that?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Classified deployment, sir." He raised an eyebrow. "You were air operations, not covert recon. That kind of classification doesn't fit your designation." Emma didn't blink. "It does now." The commander exhaled slowly, leaning back. "You're good, Hayes. Maybe too good. But if something from your past could compromise this base, I need to know." "There's nothing to compromise," she said, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. He studied her face, trying to find a crack, a flicker of doubt. There was none. Just that same steel calm that unnerved people more than arrogance ever could. Finally, he nodded. "All right. You're dismissed." She rose, saluted sharply, and walked out without another word. But as the door closed, Brooks felt an itch of curiosity he couldn't shake. He opened his secure terminal and typed her service number into the Defense Network database. Access denied. His jaw tightened. There were only two kinds of soldiers who had that kind of lock on their files: intelligence operatives and ghosts from missions that the military didn't want anyone to remember. And something told him Emma Hayes was a bit of both. Meanwhile, word of her classified record spread quietly. Rumors turned to stories. Stories turned to myth. Some said she'd been part of an off-the-books rescue gone wrong. Others whispered she'd survived a crash that killed her entire squad. Reynolds tried to drown out the gossip, but even he couldn't ignore the small details he'd begun noticing. The way she froze whenever she heard a distress beacon tone, or how she stared too long at the horizon after every flight, like she was waiting for something that would never come back. One night, after a particularly brutal endurance test, he found her alone in the hangar, sitting beside her jet under the low yellow lights. "You ever sleep?" he asked, half joking. She didn't look at him. "Sometimes." He leaned against the wing beside her. "People are talking, you know. About your record." "I know. You gonna tell me the truth?" Her eyes stayed fixed on the hangar doors. "What would it change if I did?" He shrugged. "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." She was quiet for a long moment. Then softly, "We were called Phantom Team. 6 pilots, 1 objective, deep recon near enemy lines. We weren't supposed to engage. But weather changed, communications failed, and command didn't pull us out. Reynolds didn't move. They sent a recall too late. We tried to get everyone home, but..." Her voice caught, just slightly. "Only 1 aircraft made it out, mine." He finally understood the distant look in her eyes, the relentless precision, the way she flew like every maneuver was a second chance. She turned toward him. "You wanted to know the truth." "That's it." He swallowed hard. They blamed you, didn't they? Emma's lips curved into a faint, hollow smile. They needed someone too. The next morning, the base buzzed with a new mission briefing, an upcoming joint training exercise with another air wing. But Commander Brooks had something else on his mind. He'd spent the night making calls, chasing shadows in classified archives. By dawn, he'd found a single encrypted document under her old call sign Phantom 1. The report was heavily redacted, but one line stood out. Subject survived crash under hostile conditions. Deemed unfit for command due to psychological risk factors. Brooks leaned back in his chair, frowning. Unfit for command? The woman had more composure than anyone on his base. Either the report was wrong, or someone had wanted it that way. That afternoon, during the joint training prep, Brooks called her aside. We'll be running coordinated maneuvers with the Falcon unit. I want you leading Flight 2. Her eyes flickered, surprised. Sir, I thought, I know what they said about you. He interrupted. And I don't believe it. For the first time, Emma's composure faltered. Just slightly. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, he said. Just prove them wrong. As she walked back to her team, the late sunlight reflected off the aircraft wings, bathing the hangar in gold. She could feel eyes following her, some filled with curiosity, others with newfound respect. Reynolds passed by and murmured, "Looks like the ghost just got promoted." She smiled faintly. Guess I'll have to live up to the name. That night, she stood at the edge of the runway, wind tugging at her hair, her eyes tracing the endless stretch of asphalt leading into darkness. Behind her, the base hummed with life, laughter, engines, the distant rhythm of boots, but Emma's world was still half in the past. She pulled a small metal dog tag from her pocket, its edges worn smooth from years of rubbing. It wasn't hers. She turned it over in her fingers, the name nearly faded. L.T. Daniel Cross. She whispered, "I'll finish it for you, Danny." Her call sign wasn't just a name anymore. It was a promise. A promise that the Phantom wouldn't stay buried forever. The sun rose over Fort Reddington, painting the hangars in shades of gold and copper. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and adrenaline, the unmistakable scent of flight day. Mechanics scurried across the tarmac, checking pressure gauges, fueling lines, and radar systems. Engines coughed awake one by one, sending low vibrations through the ground. Lieutenant Emma Hayes stood beside her jet, helmet tucked under one arm, flight checklist in hand. The morning wind ruffled the edge of her uniform, but her face remained calm, carved with that same quiet focus that everyone on base had come to recognize. Today was different, though. Today, she was leading her first operational flight since the Phantom disaster. Commander Brooks had called it a joint training exercise, but everyone knew it was more than that. It was a test, not of the team, but of Emma herself. Would she freeze under pressure again? Would the ghosts of her past catch up to her? Even she wasn't sure. The briefing room buzzed with chatter as both Fort Reddington's air wing and the visiting Falcon unit gathered for the mission overview. Maps flickered on the holographic screen at the front, terrain models, simulated enemy zones, and air corridors traced with glowing red lines. Brooks stepped forward, arms behind his back. Today's joint exercise will simulate a coordinated strike and extraction under live conditions. Falcon unit will lead the main offensive sweep. Reddington's wing will execute a diversion run from the north. Lieutenant Hayes, you'll lead Flight 2. Lieutenant Reynolds, you're second. Reynolds flashed Emma a grin from across the room. Looks like I'm stuck with you again, Ghost. She gave a small nod. Try to keep up this time. A few pilots chuckled. The tension in the room eased slightly. Brooks continued, "This operation is not just about flight precision. It's about trust. Communication will be key. Any misstep out there, and it won't just be a failed drill. It'll be a mess we'll be cleaning up for weeks." He looked directly at Emma when he said that last line, though his tone wasn't sharp. It was a reminder, a warning that came from concern, not doubt. "Understood, sir," she said, voice firm. By 0800 hours, engines roared to life. The ground shook beneath the jets as they lined up on the runway in formation. The control tower's voice crackled over the radio. "Falcon 1, cleared for takeoff. Reddington Wing, hold position until green light." Emma sat in the cockpit, her gloved hands steady on the controls. Her heartbeat was slow, deliberate. The hum of the instruments, the faint vibration through the seat, it all felt painfully familiar. Her eyes flicked to the photo taped to her dashboard, a new one, showing her current team lined up on the tarmac, smiling. She'd forced herself to take it a week ago, hoping maybe it would replace the old one burned into her memory. "Ghost to control, systems check complete," she said over the comms. "Copy, Ghost. You're looking green." Her call sign still made a few rookies on the channel whisper. Ghost had become a name that carried weight, respect mixed with curiosity and a hint of awe. Then came the tower's command. "Reddington Wing, you are clear for takeoff." Emma's jet thundered forward, the G-force pressing her into her seat. She lifted off effortlessly, soaring into open sky. Her team followed in perfect formation, Reynolds' jet holding tight on her left flank. Below them, the base shrank into a patchwork of gray and green. Ahead, miles of blue. "Flight 2 in position," Emma reported. "Copy that, Ghost," the commander's voice replied. "You're en route." For several minutes, the mission unfolded perfectly. Falcon unit engaged the simulated enemy targets to the south, their radar signatures lighting up like fireworks. Reddington Wing's task was to pull the enemy's attention north. A high-speed sweep through mock hostile zones, pulling radar locks to give Falcon a clean strike path. "Ghost, I'm reading 2 new radar contacts at 10 o'clock, Reynolds said. "Simulated interceptors. Adjust vector 40 degrees left. Let's draw them in." "Copy that." The radio chatter filled with calm coordination. Every move was precise, every command efficient. Emma's voice was cool and steady, guiding her team like clockwork. For a moment, it felt like the Phantom days. Only this time, nothing was falling apart. Until the storm rolled in. It came out of nowhere, thick gray clouds creeping over the horizon, lightning flickering deep inside them. Control radioed in. "Ghost, radar shows a fast-forming cell moving into your zone. Visibility's about to drop." Reynolds cursed under his breath. "You've got to be kidding me." Emma hesitated for only a second. The sound of the rain pelting her canopy, the static crackle on the radio, it was like déjà vu. The same chaos from that night 18 months ago. Reynolds noticed the silence. "Ghost, talk to me." "What's the call?" Her breathing quickened. The air inside the cockpit felt heavier. The ghosts were whispering again. The storm, the screams, the desperate mayday calls that had haunted her dreams for months. But then, she heard Commander Brooks's voice in her head. Prove them wrong. Her eyes hardened. She wasn't that broken lieutenant anymore. "Flight 2, maintain course." "We push through the storm," she commanded, voice sharp. "Switch to thermal and short-range radar. Reduce speed by 20%. Reynolds, tighten formation." "Copy that," he said instantly. The rest of the wing followed suit. Rain lashed against the jets. His visibility dropped to almost nothing. The horizon disappeared. The only thing guiding them now were their instruments and Emma's voice. "Altitude steady. Adjust to heading 045. Watch for turbulence pockets." One pilot panicked. "I'm losing visual." "Stay calm, 5, she cut in. "Trust your instruments." You're not alone out here. Her tone was calm, commanding. The kind of voice that made people believe they could make it, even when everything said they couldn't. Reynolds checked his radar and saw something unexpected. A third signal. Not part of their team or Falcons. Ghost. Picking up an unidentified contact at 7 o'clock. Emma glanced at her own screen. It flickered, static, interference. For a second, she thought she saw a pattern she recognized. Her stomach dropped. That same glitch had appeared on her radar the night of the Phantom mission, the false signal that had lured her squadron into a trap. But this wasn't the same storm, and this wasn't the same Emma Hayes. Negative. That's a ghost ping radar echo from the storm. Ignore it. Copy, Reynolds replied. They pushed on, breaking through the cloud layer moments later. When sunlight burst through the windshield, the team exhaled in unison. Below them, Falcon Unit completed their mock strike successfully. The mission had gone perfectly, despite the storm, despite the fear. Control, this is Ghost. Operation complete. All birds accounted for. Copy that, Ghost? Outstanding work out there. When they landed, the base was waiting. Crew members clapped as the jets rolled in. For the first time in years, Emma stepped out of her aircraft to applause instead of silence. Reynolds jogged over, pulling off his helmet with a grin. You just stared down another storm and didn't flinch. I'm starting to think you actually like tempting fate. She laughed, softly, genuinely. Fate and I have an understanding. Commander Brooks approached, his usual stern expression replaced with something warmer. That was textbook leadership, Lieutenant. You've earned back every ounce of trust this uniform can give. Emma nodded respectfully. Thank you, sir. As he walked away, she allowed herself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. She'd done it. Not just survived the sky, but owned it again. That night, the mess hall was loud with celebration. Pilots toasted to victories, to teamwork, to the return of the Ghost. Even Emma couldn't escape it this time. Reynolds handed her a glass of soda with a grin. Come on, you can't hide in silence forever. She raised her glass. To the living, she said simply. To the ghost who doesn't stay dead, Reynolds added. Laughter filled the air. For once, it didn't feel heavy. But when the crowd thinned and the night grew quiet, Emma slipped away to the hangar again. The moonlight poured through the open doors, casting silver light across the jets. She looked at her aircraft, the one that had carried her through another storm, and whispered, We made it this time. Her reflection in the polished metal smiled back. And for the first time in years, she believed it. The celebration from the joint operation had barely faded when the next challenge came knocking. 3 days later, at 0400 hours, Fort Reddington was jolted awake by a base-wide alert. Sirens blared through the still dark corridors, red lights flashing across metal walls. Pilots scrambled from their bunks, pulling on flight suits and helmets. Emma Hayes was already awake. She'd been reviewing flight diagnostics in her quarters, sleep elusive as always. When the siren wailed, she was the first to hit the runway. Report, she demanded as she reached the command center. Commander Brooks looked up from a glowing screen, his jaw set. Recon satellite picked up an unidentified aircraft entering restricted airspace. No transponder, no friendly code. Emma's eyes narrowed. Enemy? Could be. Could also be a rogue signal. Either way, it's heading straight for us. Call in Falcon Unit? She asked. Brooks shook his head. They're stationed 200 miles out. You're the closest, Hayes. I'm authorizing immediate scramble. Reynolds jogged up beside her, helmet in hand. Guess we're back in business. Emma's gaze flicked toward the radar feed on the monitor, a single blip moving fast, erratic. Something about its pattern made her stomach tighten. It couldn't be. But she'd seen that kind of flight path before. Unpredictable, unstable, desperate. The kind only flown by someone in trouble. Or someone with nothing left to lose. Minutes later, her jet cut through the night sky, followed by 2 others from her unit. Reynolds' voice crackled over comms. "Control, this is Ghost Wing. We're airborne and tracking the unidentified aircraft." The radar pulsed on Emma's screen. The target was moving at impossible speeds, dodging through cloud cover, then vanishing entirely before reappearing again miles away. Ghost to Control. Target appears to be using radar distortion. Possibly stealth tech. Copy, Ghost. Proceed with caution. Emma's pulse thudded in her ears. Lightning flickered in the distance. A storm on the horizon again. Of course, it always came back to the storm. As they closed in, her onboard computer pinged. A partial transponder code flashed across the display, corrupted but faintly recognizable. PHM-2. Emma froze. It couldn't be. Phantom 2, her old squadron's call sign. The second jet in her formation that night. The one piloted by Lieutenant Daniel Cross. Reynolds' voice broke through the static. "Ghost, what's happening?" "You're drifting." She snapped out of it. Adjusting course. Keep formation. But her breath caught again as the target emerged from the storm clouds. A battered fighter jet. Half its markings burned away, wings scarred, its navigation lights flickering weakly. It wasn't an enemy aircraft. It was one of theirs, or what was left of one. And through her cockpit glass, she saw the faintest glow of a name on the tail. Cross. Her throat tightened. "Control, this is Ghost," she said slowly. "Visual confirms friendly aircraft. Identification tag reads Phantom 2. Repeat, Ghost? Did you say Phantom 2? Affirmative. That's impossible, Lieutenant. Phantom 2 was destroyed 18 months ago. Reynolds' voice came in low and uncertain. Emma, are you sure about what you're seeing? She ignored him, requesting permission to pursue and establish communication. Negative, Ghost. Maintain distance until confirmation. That's an order. But orders couldn't reach through the noise in her head. The memories, the screams, the static of the radio as Phantom 2's voice vanished that night. Danny, if you can hear me, she whispered, switching to an encrypted band that hadn't been used since the mission. It's Emma. It's Phantom 1. Respond. For a long moment, there was only static. Then, faintly, a distorted voice. ... Ghost ... You left me. Her blood ran cold. Emma, what the hell was that? Reynolds barked. She couldn't answer. Her hands gripped the controls, heart hammering. ... COULDN single quotes T get out. Storm took us ... Still here ... The voice crackled again, glitching in and out. It wasn't clear if it was real, or an echo from the system's corrupted memory files. But she didn't care. She dove lower, trying to get closer to the drifting jet. Control, the signal's responding to encrypted phantom frequency, she said. I'm engaging. Negative, Ghost. Repeat, disengage immediately. But she didn't hear that. Or didn't want to. Reynolds cursed under his breath. You're going to get yourself court-martialed. Then stay behind, she shot back. He didn't. He stayed right with her. The storm swallowed them both. Thunder cracked, rain pelting against their canopies like bullets. Visibility plummeted. The ghost jet flickered on radar again, then vanished completely. Emma's instruments screamed warnings. Altitude drop. Turbulence critical. Emma. Reynolds yelled through the comms. We're blind out here. I can see him. She shouted back. But the voice in her headset changed, no longer distorted. Clear. Calm. Familiar. You couldn't save us? Emma, but you can save yourself this time. She looked around wildly. But there was nothing, no jet, no figure, no flash of wings through the clouds. Only the hollow echo of her own breathing. Her radar beeped once more, and then silence. The blip was gone. Gone like it had 18 months ago. By the time she and Reynolds broke through the storm, dawn had begun to paint the sky. The base radioed in frantically. Ghost, respond. What happened to the target? She could barely speak. Target lost. No wreckage. No debris. Nothing. Return to base. Now. Back at Fort Reddington, the debriefing room was tense. Brooks paced in front of the holomap, his face unreadable. You broke protocol, Hayes. You disobeyed a direct order, he said sternly. Emma stood at attention, soaked in rain and silence. I understand, sir, she said. What I don't understand, Brooks continued, is how an aircraft destroyed a year and a half ago suddenly appears on our radar under a registered Phantom tag, and why the hell it was transmitting your team's encrypted code. Reynolds stepped forward. Sir, whatever that was, it wasn't a glitch. We both saw it. Brooks looked between them, eyes narrowing. You're telling me a ghost plane just showed up over U.S. airspace? No one answered. Finally, he sighed. Get some rest. Both of you. Until I figure out what that was, this conversation doesn't leave this room. Yes, sir, they said in unison. That night, Emma sat alone in her quarters, the lights off. The rain outside tapped against the window like a heartbeat. She replayed the radio feed over and over, the voice, the words, the static between them. Every time it was the same. You left me. She leaned back, pressing her palms to her face. I didn't, she whispered. I tried. Her eyes fell to the dog tag still resting on her desk. LT, Daniel Cross. She picked it up, clutching it tightly until her knuckles went white. If it wasn't him, then who had used his code? At 0200 hours, her communicator beeped. A secure message from Brooks. Hayes, meet me in Command Room 7, immediately. She dressed quickly and headed across the quiet base. Brooks was waiting, the only light in the room coming from the glowing blue radar screen. I ran the telemetry data again, he said quietly. The radar signature wasn't just random interference. He zoomed in. The waveform pattern was faint but unmistakable. It matches the last recorded signal from the Phantom mission. Emma stared at the screen, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Sir, are you saying... I'm saying someone either replicated your squadron's frequency, or one of them never went down. The silence between them felt endless. Finally, Emma spoke, voice barely above a whisper. Then I need to find out which. Outside, the storm began again, wind howling across the runway. Lightning flashed, illuminating the hangar doors where her jet waited, sleek, silent, and ready. For the first time in years, Emma Hayes wasn't running from her ghosts. She was going after them. The first thing Emma heard when she woke up was the high-pitched hum of medical equipment. For a moment, she thought she was back in that old mission, the one that haunted her sleep, hearing static, wind, and the fading voices of her team. But then came the beeping, the white walls, and the faint smell of antiseptic. Her eyelids fluttered open to the blinding light of the infirmary. A nurse stood nearby, clipboard in hand. Lieutenant Hayes, she said softly. Welcome back. Emma blinked hard, her throat dry. How long? 36 hours. You've been unconscious since they brought you in from the field? Reynolds? Her voice cracked. The name came out like a prayer and a demand at once. The nurse hesitated before replying. He's alive. In recovery, just down the hall. Broken ribs, concussion. But he'll make it. You both will. Emma sank back against the pillow, exhaling slowly. Her hands trembled. It was only then she realized they were bandaged, the skin blistered and raw from gripping the flight, stick through the firestorm. She closed her eyes, but images came rushing back, the screaming alarms, the smoke, a spinning horizon, the way Reynolds' voice had cut through the chaos. "We're not dying today, Ghost. Pull her up." And she had, barely. The nurse adjusted her fore and smiled faintly. "You should rest, Lieutenant. You're lucky to be alive." Emma stared at the ceiling. Lucky. The word tasted strange on her tongue. She didn't feel lucky. She felt hollow, like she'd left a piece of herself somewhere out there in the wreckage. 2 days later, she forced herself to walk. Against every warning, she got out of bed, unsteady but determined. The corridors were cold, quiet, and full of the faint echo of boots on tile. When she reached Reynolds' room, he was half sitting up, his face bruised but alive. He looked up and smirked when he saw her. "Well, well? Look who's back from the dead," he said, voice raspy. "You look worse," Emma replied, trying to hide the flicker of emotion that almost crossed her face. "I told them you'd check on me," Reynolds said. "You're not the type to just walk away from a wingman." "I didn't come to check," she said dryly, but the corner of her mouth twitched, almost smiling. "Just wanted to confirm you weren't haunting the base yet." He chuckled, wincing at the pain. "Guess that makes 2 ghosts, huh?" There was a long silence between them, the kind that said more than words ever could. Finally, Reynolds spoke again. "They're saying Command wants to debrief you soon. Word is you're flying out there. It saved half the squadron. If you hadn't pulled up when you did, we'd all be smoke." Emma looked down, her voice low. "And if I hadn't gone out there in the first place, none of you would have been in danger." He shook his head. "You still don't get it, do you? You didn't start that fight. You finished it. You didn't fail anyone." She didn't reply, but his words sank deeper than she'd admit. By the time she returned to duty, weeks later, something had changed. The silence that had once felt like her armor now carried weight, not of guilt, but of presence. People noticed when she entered the room. They stood straighter, listened closer. Her reputation had grown into something larger than myth. Ghost was no longer a whisper. It was a symbol. Command called her in for a meeting that same week. Colonel Anders himself stood by the window, arms crossed. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said, turning as she entered. "Glad to see you standing again." "Thank you, sir." He motioned for her to sit. "I've reviewed the reports. Your decisions out there, the way you took command mid-flight when your CO was down, that wasn't protocol. It was instinct. It was the kind of instinct we need leading others." Emma blinked, unsure where this was going. "Sir?" Anders handed her a folder. "We're forming a new tactical flight division. Small unit. Specialized missions, top security. We need someone to lead it. Your name came up first." Her chest tightened. "You want me to command the squadron?" Anders nodded. "You earned it. You've proven you can make the hardest calls under fire. You've got a team's worth of loyalty behind you now. Whether you realize it or not, they'd follow you into hell." Emma looked down at the folder, her name stamped across the top in bold black letters. "What's the division called?" she asked quietly. Anders smiled. "You tell me. You're the first one in it." She hesitated, then said it without thinking. "Spectre Squadron." The colonel nodded once. "Appropriate." Word spread like wildfire across Fort Reddington. The quiet lieutenant, the one who had barely spoken a dozen words her first month, was now heading the base's newest elite division. Pilots lined up to volunteer, some out of admiration, others out of sheer curiosity. Reynolds, of course, was first on the list. When he walked into her office, he found her in uniform, reviewing reports with the same calm focus as ever. "So," he said, leaning against the doorway, "when do I start, boss?" She didn't look up. "You think I'd pick you? You don't have a choice. I already put my name in." Finally, she glanced up, her expression unreadable. "You realize this isn't a casual assignment. You'll follow orders. From you? Always." A small silence passed, and then she nodded. "You'll get your briefing tomorrow." "Dismissed, Lieutenant." He grinned, saluted, and left, but not before muttering, "You know, Ghost, you're starting to sound a lot like a commander." The following weeks turned the base upside down. Spectre Squadron trained harder, flew faster, and coordinated like a single living thing. Emma drilled them relentlessly, not because she wanted perfection, but because she'd already learned what imperfection cost. "Discipline saves lives," she told them one morning, her voice carrying over the roar of engines. "Ego kills. You follow orders, or you don't come back. Simple as that." Her words were steel, but her eyes, sharp and steady, inspired something deeper. Her pilots didn't fear her. They trusted her. She was calm under pressure, unflinching in chaos. Soon, her leadership began to ripple beyond her squadron. Even those who once mocked her silence now spoke her name with respect. The base commander himself would pause when she passed by. She was no longer the quiet girl from Langley. She was Lieutenant Emma Hayes, call sign Ghost, the woman who had survived fire, rebuilt her unit, and turned loss into discipline. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Emma stood by the runway, watching the last of her team's drills. The engines roared, streaks of gold reflecting off the metal wings as the jets lifted into the orange sky. Reynolds joined her quietly. "You ever think about how far you've come?" he asked. Emma didn't look away from the sky. "I think about how far I still have to go." He nodded, understanding. "They're saying Spectre's going to be assigned to top-tier defense missions soon. International level." "Good," she said simply. "We'll be ready." There was a pause. Then Reynolds added, softer, "You know, the others, they don't see you the way you see yourself anymore. You're not running from ghosts. You've become one, the kind that protects instead of haunts." She finally turned to him, her gaze steady. Maybe that's enough. Later that night, she returned to her quarters, the same bunk she'd once sat on silently when she first arrived. It looked different now. The laughter she used to ignore outside the barracks no longer felt distant. She opened her duffel and took out the old photo, the one with her former squadron. 6 faces smiled up at her from a time before everything went wrong. For a long moment, she stared at it, her thumb brushing over the faces one by one. "I didn't forget," she whispered. "I'll never forget." She placed the photo on the nightstand beside her new mission patch. Spectre Squadron, lead. Outside, the night was quiet. But somewhere in the distance, a jet thundered through the clouds, and for the first time in years, Emma Hayes smiled. Not because the ghosts were gone, but because she finally knew how to live with them. The morning sky over Fort Reddington was painted with streaks of crimson and gold, the kind of sunrise that promised both hope and challenge. Emma Hayes stood on the tarmac, helmet under her arm, eyes fixed on the horizon. Her squadron, Spectre Squadron, lined up behind her, a precise formation of pilots who trusted her implicitly, whose respect she had earned not with words, but with action. This was no ordinary mission. Intelligence reports indicated a rogue drone network testing experimental weapon systems along the U.S. northern perimeter. The stakes were higher than any training exercise, higher even than the storm and the phantom echoes of her past. Lives were at risk, and failure was not an option. Commander Brooks approached, his expression grave. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said, his voice carrying both authority and concern, This is real. The northern sector is volatile. You'll coordinate the strike and extraction. Falcon Unit will provide aerial support, but you'll be leading the engagement. Emma nodded once, crisp, unwavering. Understood, sir. We'll be ready. Good luck, Rooks said. Return in one piece. Emma turned to her squadron. Spectre, this is it. Eyes sharp, instruments sharper, and remember, precision is survival. Let's move. The jets roared to life, engines vibrating beneath the ground as the team prepared for takeoff. Reynolds sat beside her in formation, his helmet clipped, radio open. You ready, Ghost? She allowed herself the faintest grin. Always. The formation lifted into the sky, slicing through the crisp morning air. The northern sector awaited, a maze of mountain ranges, radar interference, and the unknown. Emma's mind was calm, a rare clarity that came from experience, discipline, and the memory of every mission, every loss she had endured. Radars picking up multiple drones ahead, Reynolds reported. Small, agile, looks like they've upgraded. Nothing like we've seen in training. Emma scanned the readouts. Adjust formation. Wings spread tight. We draw their attention, and Falcon sweeps in from above. Spectre 2, maintain 300 meters behind me, she instructed. Her team obeyed instantly, the trust between them seamless, almost instinctive. They entered the engagement zone. The first drone appeared, darting through the canyons like a shadow. Laser-guided targeting systems locked onto the squadron. Emma's voice was calm, precise, cutting through the radio chatter. Evasive maneuvers, 30-degree roll. Prepare countermeasures. The jets twisted and turned, flares erupting as the drones fired simulated strikes. Reynolds was close behind, following her every command. The squadron moved as one, a single entity under Emma's direction. Then came the second wave, a dozen drones, faster, smarter, and more aggressive. The radar showed multiple blips converging on their position. Emma's pulse quickened, but her voice never wavered. Spectre Squadron, split formation. Reynolds, lead left flank. I take center. Watch each other's six. Engage only when I give the signal. Every pilot obeyed. Every maneuver was perfect. The battle was chaos and ballet combined. Metal slicing the wind as jets darted through canyons, dodging simulated fire, outmaneuvering the relentless drones. Emma's hands flew over controls, thumbs on triggers, eyes scanning instruments and horizon simultaneously. Ghost, we've got multiple drones locking onto my wing. Reynolds warned. Deploy flares, cut right, 360 turn. She shouted. The drones scattered like startled birds. Within minutes, the squadron had neutralized the threat, drawing the enemy fire away from Falcon Unit, which executed a flawless strike on the Rogue Network's command nodes. Then, it happened. A blip on Emma's radar, moving erratically, too large to be a drone. Spectre, unidentified craft, approaching fast from the northeast. Not on any flight plan, she warned. Reynolds squinted at his instruments. It's huge. Weapons signature unknown. What do we do? Emma's gaze hardened. This wasn't training. This wasn't a simulation. Her memory flashed back. The Phantom mission. The storm, the crash, the dog tag, and Daniel Cross. She gritted her teeth. We engage. Full combat protocol. But stay sharp. We don't know what we're facing. The craft appeared, sleek, black, almost organic in shape. Missiles launched from its undercarriage, tracking the jets in deadly arcs. The squadron dodged in perfect sync, but the sheer size of the target made maneuvers difficult. Emma calculated. Every fraction of a second mattered. Reynolds, take the left flank, Spectre 3, right. I'll go for the core. Focus fire on engines. They split, weaving through the canyon walls as missiles streaked past, some narrowly missing their wings. Emma's eyes narrowed, hands steady despite the adrenaline. She was in control. Core targeted, 3, 2, 1, fire. The drone exploded in a cascade of sparks, flames, and smoke. The shockwave rattled the squadron, but they held formation. The battle was over. For the first time in a long while, Emma exhaled. She had led them through chaos and returned them safely. Back at Fort Reddington, the squadron landed amid cheers and applause. Commander Brooks was waiting, his face breaking into a rare smile. Lieutenant Hayes, Spectre Squadron. Outstanding performance. You've done something remarkable today. You didn't just lead, you inspired. The base erupted in congratulations. Pilots and crew members who had once whispered behind her back now sought her out to shake hands, to praise her leadership, to ask how they could follow in her example. Reynolds approached, removing his helmet. You did it, Ghost. You made the impossible routine. Emma shook her head, finally allowing herself a small smile. We did it. Everyone did. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of respect, not as a burden, but as recognition of every choice, every sacrifice, every silent night she had endured. Later that night, she walked the runway alone. The sun had dipped, leaving a violet twilight behind. She stood beside her jet, touching the fuselage gently. The hum of the base in the distance reminded her of how far she had come, from the quiet girl no one noticed to the Ghost, who commanded a squadron. The woman who faced storms, both literal and figurative, and emerged stronger every time. Reynolds joined her quietly. You're still quiet, you know, he said softly. Emma glanced at him, eyes reflecting the fading light. Some things don't need words. He nodded. No, I guess they don't. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the stars emerge in the sky. Somewhere far above, a satellite blinked in orbit, a reminder of missions yet to come. Emma reached into her pocket and held the dog tag, Daniel Cross. She had survived, she had led, and she had kept the promise she whispered years ago. Rest easy, Danny, she murmured. I've got it from here. The base lights glimmered, the jets rested, and the wind carried her voice only to the horizon. Quiet, yes, but filled with power, resolve, and a presence no one would forget. By the time Emma returned to her quarters, the news was spreading across the base. The Ghost of Fort Reddington had returned, stronger than ever. A leader, a legend, a protector. And for the first time, Emma Hayes believed it too. The Ghost was no longer just a call sign. She was the legend behind it.